high-yielding technology stocks is the goal. It's kind of the holy grail, a lot of growth, amazing industry, and high payouts. The thing is, as you're about to see, it's very hard to find this combination, but not impossible. So the first thing I did in preparation for this video was come to my brokerage. They have this little filter section. So I came over to information for information technology, and I began looking at the options. And we see great companies, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Visa, but the dividend yield is almost non-existent. In fact, if I filter by just 1% dividend yield, we essentially are left with Comcast, AT&T, and Verizon. And these are great companies, but they're not really tech companies in the way that we want it to be. But alas, these are not the only technology companies. We can filter by manufacturing, and we can see here we have Apple, Tesla, Nvidia, and all of these kind of tech names. If we do the same thing and filter by a 1% dividend yield, we can see a few names: TSMC, Intel, Broadcom, Texas Instruments, Qualcomm, and the trend here is they're all in the semiconductor space. And the semiconductor space is actually really fundamental to all technology. I mean, think of all these semiconductor using devices just in the room with you right now. It's insane. And that's why there's been an ongoing chip shortage, even in things like the automotive industry. So it's a very high demand field, and these are great companies. But if you're anything like me, you really don't know that much about the semiconductor market. I mean, you know the basics, you know the extreme demand, but you don't really know the difference between Broadcom and Texas Instruments. So this is what we have to first understand. Here's a pretty awesome breakdown of the global semiconductor market share, and we can see the segments of the semiconductor market. So the biggest one at 32.4% is networking and communications. So these are those 5G chips, Wi-Fi chips, Bluetooth, all the connectivity types of chips. And then here in green, we have data processing. So this is kind of the industrial data centers. And then third is just industrial, whatever that means, followed by consumer electronics. This is a lot smaller than I had envisioned. And then we have automotive, which is also quite large. And then finally, government, which is pretty small. This website also has an infographic. I'll leave it linked down below, but this is the semiconductor market at kind of a glance. And we can see the size right here. So it's $425 billion in 2020. And by 2028, the semiconductor market is going to be over $800 billion. So that's pretty intense. They also have something here on the latest trends. So increasing implementation of wireless technology, high demand for electric vehicles, and rising demand for memory devices. Some leading drivers are extensive adoption of smartphones and smart devices, kind of like the Internet of Things, how everything now is connected to the internet, and thus needs a lot of processors. Growing consumption of advanced electronics in Asia Pacific, and increasing demand for integrated circuits from emerging economies. This breaks it down by components. So we have memory devices, logic devices, analog IC, MPU, MCU, I don't really know what those are, sensors, discrete power devices, and others. And then here they have the key players, and these are all the names that we just saw listed on my brokerage account. So Qualcomm, Intel, Broadcom, Texas Instruments, even Nvidia, Samsung, and so on and so on. So that's the semiconductor market at a glance. Now I'm going to take a dive into my favorite picks, but stick around till the end because I'm going to place it all on a visual kind of infographic of my own, and I think it's going to help make a lot of sense of all these companies. So the first company I want to look at is Texas Instruments, ticker TXN. In the past year, it's done well, much like all of these companies, up almost 50%. But I'll touch on the numbers in a second, but the first most important thing is to understand what this company actually does. So this is a pretty awesome website, a lot of data, but let's break it down, and I'll leave this link down below. So right here, Texas Instruments has 3 operating segments. Analog semiconductors refers to the sale of analog semiconductors to different industries such as the automotive and industrials. So if we come back to the split up of the semiconductor market, we can see that Texas Instruments focuses more on automotive and industrial. Embedded processors refers to the sale of embedded devices to different industries, including products such as processors, microcontrollers, and connectivity products. And then they have others, which include semiconductors for specialized products like calculators and things like that. And here is a breakdown of where the revenue comes from. So the vast majority, about 76.4% of the revenue, comes from the analog semiconductor space. The analog semiconductor segment will also be the fastest growing segment in percentage terms, growing 16% from 2018 to 2021 to add 1.7 billion to the top line over this period. So that's pretty good. The largest segment of TXN, which is industrials and automotive, is growing relatively fast. So hopefully now we have a slightly better understanding of what this company does and who buys from them. Now let's take a look at more of the financial data. One thing I don't like is the total revenues are a little bit flat. The trailing 12 months looks a little bit better, but there's not a lot of growth, and maybe that's because the industrial space is kind of saturated. Who knows, but that's something I noticed. But if I come over to dividends and look at the dividend data for this company, the yield is over 2%, the payout ratio is around 54%, and they're growing that dividend really fast. It's growing at like 20% a year, so that is immense dividend growth. And the payout ratio is semi-flat. It's not spiking up super fast, even though the dividend growth is pretty fast. So that's good to see. Now, the last thing I want to do is come over to their actual website and look at the products that they sell. Pretty basic, but a lot of people don't do this. So we can see some of their new ones here. This first one is a battery monitor. We can also take a look at their full product page here, and we can see all the different industrial industries that they service. So amplifiers, clocks, power management, motors, sensors, wireless connectivity. So this is what this company does. Lots of industrial and automotive products. So TI's customers, which number about 100,000, use the company's chips for applications that include autos, industrial machinery, consumer electronics, communication devices, and calculators. The company also sticks to basics in production, operating its own manufacturing plants, which it places around the world. So hopefully now we have a better understanding of what this company really does in the semiconductor space and how it might be different from some other ones. The next company I want to talk about is good old Qualcomm. If you have an Android phone, you're probably using a Qualcomm processor at the heart of it to run everything. In the past year, they've had great performance, like every other semiconductor play. But what does Qualcomm do? So Qualcomm has three business segments: QSI, QTL, and QCT. And this is a chart of the revenue from each of them. So we can clearly see that QCT is the largest, followed by QTL, and QSI is a lot less. But of course, what are these business segments? If we come down here, QCT, the largest business segment by revenue, is the following. So QCT develops and supplies integrated circuits and system software based on 3G, 4G, and 5G, and other technologies used in mobile devices. Wireless networks, devices used in the Internet of Things, IoT, broadband gateway equipment, consumer electronic devices, and automotive systems for telematics and infotainment. And if we come down and look at the second largest segment, QTL, they grant licenses and otherwise provides rights to use portions of our intellectual property portfolio. So this is simply licensing what they have to other producers. So in terms of the market segments of the semiconductor space, we can clearly see how Qualcomm is different than Texas Instruments. This is another simple breakdown of the revenue segments. So equipment and services is that first one where they make their own chips, and they focus a lot on wireless connectivity and 5G. And we can see in blue that is most of their revenue. And then licensing out their intellectual property is in red. Their total revenues, much like TXN, they're not growing that much, although recently the trend is reversing, much the same with TXN. They are beginning to make more revenue. Their dividend right now is just under 2%. Their payout ratio is low, it's only 34%, and the growth rate is kind of average, around 6%. Now the last one I got for you guys, and my personal favorite, is Broadcom. They have the highest dividend yield on this list, very similar, great performance, and their dividend data, along with all their financial data, is really good. About Broadcom. Broadcom is a technology company. The company designs, develops, and supplies a range of semiconductor and infrastructure software solutions. It operates through two segments: semiconductor solutions and infrastructure software. It provides semiconductor solutions for managing the movement of data in data centers, telecom, enterprise, and embedded networking applications. Its mainframe software solutions include solutions for IBM Z mainframe platform, which runs business applications. So the takeaway from this is Broadcom focuses a lot on data centers, telecom, enterprise, and some networking microchips. And they also have a smaller infrastructure software revenue segment. And this is the exact split up by revenue. So in blue, we have the semiconductor solutions, and in red, we have that infrastructure software that they offer. And we can see how that looks. So as mentioned, when it comes to total revenue, Broadcom is the strongest on this list by far. Also, their dividend data is the best. Right now, it's 3%, very high. Payout ratio is 52%, and the growth rate is 50%. Let's take a deeper dive into that. Most recently it was 20%, but it's very high. Now, I do want to take a look at their products just to get a better understanding, once again, of what this company really focuses on. So here they have storage and systems. So this is stuff like PCIe, pretty cool. They have wireless, so things like Bluetooth and wireless LAN infrastructure. Optical products, so this is like the camera sensor in your smartphone. Broadcom might be making it. And in their mainframe software solutions. Now, when it comes to who's actually buying products from Broadcom, the major consumers include Apple, Hewlett Packard, I don't know who that is, Motorola, IBM, Dell, Asus, Lenovo, Linsky, Logitech, Nintendo, Nokia. These are all very big name, successful companies that rely on Broadcom to be their supplier. So that's a good spot to be. Now, as promised, I want to make a visual of where these companies fit in the semiconductor market. And this is based off the info that we just researched together. So let's begin with Broadcom because we just talked about it. So Broadcom is definitely big in consumer electronics. So I can draw a line there. They're also big in data processing. They provide a lot of solutions in that space along with all that infrastructure, all aimed at data centers. And they also had a lot of networking and communication devices. So that's kind of where Broadcom fits in the market. Qualcomm focuses a lot on 5G. You're probably going to hear that a lot in the news, that Qualcomm is a great 5G play. And that's not wrong. So they definitely have a big presence in the networking and communications, along with consumer electronics. As mentioned, if you have an Android phone, it most likely has a Qualcomm processor inside of it, along with a Qualcomm modem. And then Texas Instruments has a big foot in the industrial space, right? So they make a lot of just random industrial processors for things like refrigerators, calculators, all that stuff, along with a big presence in the automotive industry, because cars need a lot of chips to do a lot of random stuff, like put the windows up and down. There's a small chip that does that, and Texas Instruments is a major supplier for those. So that's kind of a broad breakdown of the segment. These are all great companies, but they focus on different segments of the semiconductor space, and hopefully you have a better understanding of how that breaks down. And if you do, leave the video a like, it helps out the channel a lot, and I will see you in the next one.